I want to introduce you to Dr. Valerie McCarthy, who is faculty. She's a professor at the School of Nursing. She's going to be talking today about which path will you choose.
I'm Val McCarthy, and I want to thank Christian for her introduction. I want to tell you I'm very honored to be here with you today, and I'm very grateful to the Optimal Aging Institute who invited me to speak today. And I had no idea I was being awarded this lovely honor, being inducted into the Scholars Program, so that's very nice. I'm going to start a little bit, just introduce myself. Basically, I've been a nurse for 45 years. I've done all kinds of nursing. I've done critical care, home health care, staff education. I own my own business, started and ran my own business. And when I was 55, I retired. And I got a little bored. So I went back to school and joined the first PhD in nursing program cohort at U of L and got a PhD, which is kind of like an unusual retirement hobby. But it was fun. And it was something that I had wanted to do all my life, and with responsibilities for work and kids, etc., hadn't had the opportunity, and then I finally got to do it. And I wanted to do that because I was interested in teaching. And then they told me I had to do research too. And I said, well, what do I have to do? And they told me, and fortunately I fell in love with research also. So this year I have been promoted to associate professor and earned tenure, which is really nice because now I'm thinking of retiring. As a student, we had an assignment to find a theory, a nursing theory, and analyze it. And I stumbled across a theory of successful aging. And it's a mid-range nursing theory. And it defines successful aging, and you could substitute optimal aging, differently than the typical definition, which is no disease and disability. If you're healthy and independent, you're successful, and other than that, you blew it. And this theory looked at aging more from, are you able to cope and adapt so that you can do the things that really matter to you and still feel connected and some meaning in your life? And I liked that definition much better. After 45 years in nursing, I'm a little tired of disease, and I'm much more interested in health. That theory says that there are two main factors that predict or promote successful aging: the ability to adapt and something called transcendence. Well, I've always known that adaptation is like big, but I didn't know what transcendence was. So I started trying to figure out about it. And as I did, I learned that it was something I was more interested in finding out more about. So I did 3 studies testing this theory of successful aging. Did one as a student, one was my dissertation study, and then I did a follow-up study. And basically disproved the theory. Because what I found was, statistically, transcendence is such a huge contributor to this view of successful aging that even something as important as adaptation paled in comparison. And that's when I decided to switch my train of research to focus on transcendence and to learn something more about it. Transcendence basically is a late life developmental process. And it's something that begins, like most development, earlier in your life, but progresses and tends to mature later in life. A lot of different philosophers and psychiatrists and psychologists and sociologists have written and talked about transcendence. And I was very fortunate to be able to just dive into the literature and read about this under the guidance of somebody who was very knowledgeable, and that was Dr. Jane Thibault. So I had someone who took my hand and walked me through learning that. I found two actual theories about transcendence. One is Lars Tornström, who's a Swedish sociologist, and he did a theory of gerotranscendence. And basically, he looks at transcendence as something pretty much that happens all of a sudden only in late life, and your perspective changes on yourself, on your relationships with other people, and just on the meaning of life, on the nature of the here and now, and a dimension he calls cosmic. And his theory was that gerotranscendence, higher levels of gerotranscendence, result in higher life satisfaction. I found a second theory that was a nursing theory. Of course, I'm partial. But Pamela Reed, who's at University of Arizona or Arizona State, I always mix up which one, did a nursing theory of self-transcendence. And there's self-transcendence, there's ego-transcendence, and there's gerotranscendence. And with small differences, they all are pretty much talking about the same concept. Pam Reed said that not only is transcendence something that we have a natural tendency to develop in later life, but that it is also something that can be triggered by vulnerability at any time in life. And part of the research that she's done with this has been with older adults, and part has been with people who have HIV or cancer or other life-threatening, life-changing conditions. And so she is the only theorist I found that extends this concept beyond just late life. She says it's changing our boundaries. Tornström said it's changing our perspective. It's the same thing. It's changing about how we see ourselves, how we look at our relationships with other people. Reed says it affects how we see time, and also how we see the existential, the big question, the meaning. Why am I here? You know, why is life the way it is? The outcome of transcendence, according to Reed, is well-being. And this is psychological and physical well-being. Okay. So here are some things that define or give you examples of what transcendence is. And if you ever go into research, do try to pick a topic that's not so abstract and difficult to explain. I'm an older adult myself, and I can experience these things and not just talk about them from my research. The things I experience that I label and I recognize as transcendence are I don't tend to sweat the small stuff as much, and I tend to enjoy and value the little good things, the funny thing my grandkids said, or how beautiful those lilacs were, more, and worry about stuff less. I also tend to focus more on doing what I want to do, and I don't worry so much about what other people think or what other people want me to do. I definitely have a decreased fear of death and more of a sense of being part of something bigger than just the here and now, some larger purpose. All of those things are part of what we talk about with transcendence. One of the ones that I find really interesting is where there's an increase in caring for other people, especially for younger people, for the generations coming beyond us. But we want caring to be more reciprocal. We want to learn to care for ourselves also. And I really liked the balance of that idea. Okay. So, there's a lot of research that I found that has been done on transcendence, hundreds of studies in nursing and outside of nursing. And there's been a lot of what we call correlation research or descriptive research that shows transcendence is associated with all these good things and more. The thing is, when we're talking about associated with, what we mean is that as we see levels of transcendence higher, those people are more likely to have higher well-being or life satisfaction. Or studies that show that people who have higher levels of self-transcendence tend to have lower levels of depression. But that research only says they got something to do with each other. But we really don't know what that is. We don't know which is causing which, or if something else entirely is involved in what's going on. To find out anything about the actual effects of self-transcendence, what does it do? You need to do what we call intervention research. You got to do an experiment. You got to go in and you kind of measure and you find out where everybody is, and then you do something and you measure what happens. And if you do enough intervention research that statistically shows every time we increase self-transcendence, this happens, then you can start talking about maybe there's a cause and effect. But all of the research, the hundreds of studies that are out here about self-transcendence, there's less than a half dozen that looked at intervention, that looked at anything approaching what does it do, what are the effects of self-transcendence. And that research is harder and more expensive and more time-consuming to do. But I got so into the topic that I decided I needed to go that way. And nobody else had really done it. The little bit of research that had been done, there was a little workshop using poetry, there were a couple of support groups for people with cancer, but no one had actually said, what do we need to do to increase self-transcendence? And then we can measure what it does. So I did what's called a concept analysis, which means I went out and I read all the literature and I printed out all these articles and read them and highlighted them. And then I needed to organize them somehow. So I started throwing them in piles. And I ended up with 5 piles. And looking at, well, these ones seem the same and these ones seem the same and these ones were a lot the same. And I looked how they were the same and gave them names. And then I put that together in shapes. We call this a conceptual model. And this got published 3 years ago in the journal, 3 or 4 years ago, in the Journal of Holistic Nursing. And that, the purpose of that, was to give me some foundation, some reasonable basis to think that what I want to do in an intervention makes sense, that it's connected, that there's some reason to think it might work. I was lucky enough to present at the International Gerontological Society of America conference a couple of years ago, and with one of my undergraduate students, which was fun. And instead of the formal, all the circles and stuff model, which we do in research and science, I'm married to an artist, and I got this creative thing going, and I had to do something with it, so I made him help me. And I put my idea into a tree. And if you can kind of see, down at the bottom, the big main roots are those same 5 concepts that I named my piles, the same 5 concepts that were in that circle. Now, we could organize that anyway, different ways. There's nothing to say that's the only way to organize things. And there's nothing to say that these 5 concepts are totally and completely separate, different from each other. They interact and merge and run around and play with each other all the time. But between the 5 of them, I think we've captured the bulk of what it is that transcendence is made of. And those were relationships, creativity, introspection, looking at ourselves, taking a good look at ourselves, contemplation of the world, the nature of life, and spirituality, contemplation of something beyond the here and now. And between those 5 concepts, I believe that we've pretty much encompassed what transcendence is. Now, I don't know, and there's no research out there to tell me how do you increase self-transcendence. But there's a lot of research out there to show me how to promote healthy relationships, or to foster introspection, or get people to have time for contemplation, or to be creative, or to support spirituality. Those things we know how to do. So I created a program that put all 5 of those things together, and we gave the program a name, the Psychoeducational Approach to Transcendence and Health. And I have to credit my friend Lynn Hall, who's research dean at the School of Nursing, because a bunch of us were brainstorming because we needed a name for this thing. And I wanted the initials to sound right. And she came up with this, and it's exactly right, because this is about a path. It's about a way forward. It's not even really about arriving. It's about the trip getting there. Okay? So what the path is basically a series of 8 weekly meetings, small group meetings. We aim for about 10 people. 8 to 10 is good. And we meet for 90 minutes, an hour and a half, once a week. We also ask participants to practice some of the stuff they learn in these group meetings at home. We say 10 or 15 minutes a day. Most days, if you miss some days, don't worry about it. But that helps people learn things and kind of by practicing get it set in their head and kind of reinforces what they've learned, get it to stick. And hopefully, and what we think we are finding, is that for some people, some of that they will start doing long-term after the study's over. Okay? So, the elements of the PATH program, the pieces that put it together, that encompass these 5 domains or areas of transcendence, are mindfulness practices, group processes, and creative projects. And let me just give you a few examples, nitty-gritty. The group gathers, and some people are running late, and we're talking about this, and we're worried about that, and we're all hurrying. And then we do some deep breathing and relaxation, and a little bit of guided imagery. We call it meditation light. And helps everyone to calm down, slow down, get in a different place. And it works. Then the group, and I have discussion questions, and each week session kind of focuses on relationships or creativity or spirituality or introspection, a different piece of the pie. And I throw out a discussion question. I usually have a second question available if I need it, but I've never needed it, because it's an open-ended question. It's to get people talking and sharing. And it doesn't matter what we cover, or we have to talk about this. It's allowing people to have the time and the trust and the acceptance with the people around them to talk about things and think about things we don't usually get time or safety for. And then after that, we have some kind of creative project. Now, I told you I'm married to an artist, right? I can't draw stick figures. I am not creative and artistic. But I also know that creativity is a very important innate part of being who we really are, of expressing ourselves. So we came up with some creative projects. After the first group, we learned some important things about what not to do. Never paint the first session. And if you do, for God's sake, have drop cloths. But what we found with that creativity is it got everybody laughing and cracking up and loosening up. And you know, if you didn't mock me and say mean things about my crazy looking thing I just made, then maybe next week I'm going to feel a little safer talking with you and being a little more open with you when we're talking. Okay? So that's basically what the PATH program is. None of these three things are unique or original. Lots of people do all three. But a big part of what's unique is combining them this way. And we find that the group processes probably are where most of the effect comes from, but that won't happen without the mindfulness to slow us down and the creativity to make us safe. Okay. So, I did a study, and this was just a feasibility study. How can I put all these things together and make this into an actual program? What will it be like? And I did this study at a seniors community center, the Muscles Senior Wellness Center, over not too far from here. And it was just a feasibility study. That means, let's see if we can make this work. We don't know much yet. So we had a rough draft. We did the study with 20 older adults, men and women. And as some of you may know, in the older adult population, there's a lot more women than men, particularly the older we get, because women live longer. So, not surprisingly, out of the 20 people, we had 4 men, and the rest were women. And we did what we call, excuse me, random assignment, which means randomly, we let the computer pick. And some people went into the PATH program intervention group, and some people were our control group, and they had a Wednesday afternoon movie matinee with popcorn. Randomly, the computer put only women in the intervention group. Only women actually got the PATH program this first time by accident. And as it turned out, and with what we learned from the women in the program, that probably turned out to be a good thing. Because the women felt that they probably would not have been as open or talked about the topics they talked about in a mixed group. Down the road, we're going to have to work this up for men, but I don't know about mixing genders. Those are what we did. That's what the purpose was. And the results. Gender implications. We decided that for now, only women are going to be in a group for the PATH program. That down the road we'll develop this for men. Down the road we may try it for men and women, but we don't want the confusion of what's the effect of gender when we're still trying to figure out what does the program do. The very first session, one of the participants said for the first time ever in her life that she had been sexually abused as a child. And she revealed that in our very first session. Now, we had kind of gone into this, is this going to be like a psychotherapy support group? Or is this going to be more like a community social support group? So right then and there, I decided it was going to not be a psychotherapy group. It was going to be more of a peer support group. Because we're not set up for that. And I'm not a mental health nurse. I'm a community nurse. Okay? Fortunately, I did have a mental health practitioner from Kent with me. All right. We looked at the importance of the relationship and bonding, and that probably was one of the 2 most important things that came out of it. This study, we also got some glimpses of, I never really thought about myself much before. I've always thought about everybody else. I was raised to take care of other people. Oh, you got me thinking about myself. Maybe there's something there. I kind of want to think more about that. And look, I might be pretty good. Remember, one of the aspects of self-transcendence is increased self-acceptance. So we got hints of that in this first study. We also had thought at the beginning that maybe some kind of teaching about healthy aging would be part of it, and we threw that out. We found that it was letting the group lead the group and take the group where they wanted to go that seemed to be effective. I was real worried about doing meditation because I thought maybe the older adult population would think that that was kind of weird, or, they ate it up like French toast. They loved it. So we really learned to do a little bit more of that than I had thought we would be able to do. The creative experiences, as I mentioned before, I learned not to paint the first day. I learned how long it takes to do a process. I knew what kind of help do I have to have available for people who may have arthritis in their hands or sensory limits, they have trouble seeing. What kind of creative projects are enjoyable and not frustrating and can get done in the amount of time we have. So this first study taught us a lot about that, and after this study, it was a little less painful trying to deal with that. And finally, these glimpses of self-care. Quantitative results. When you do a research study and there's only 20 people in it, you don't really expect like the statistics to come tell you big, for certain, definite stuff. Because you have to have a lot of people for statistics to really show up. What I was worried about was, would the things I was measuring at least go in the direction I was saying they should go? If I went and did this project to increase self-transcendence and afterward it had dropped, that would have been the end of this research. But what we found is all the good things we wanted and thought should go up did. And things like depression that we wanted to go down did. Now remember, we still don't have statistical showing that that's any cause and effect there. Just the association. All right? We did get significance for health-related quality of life. And we got not a significant increase in life satisfaction, but a big increase, while we had a significant decrease in life satisfaction in the control group. So in other words, the intervention group didn't go as high as, they could, but they went up and everybody else went down. And you know what that was? We went into the depths of winter, is what I think. So they may not have gone up enough to be statistically significant, but the fact that they went up was important. So that was like, Next slide. We also came to some conclusions from that. We learned a lot about how to shape and further develop the program. We got some insights into what the participants told us the effect was of. I had people saying, this changed my life. I had people say, I'm 86 years old and it never occurred to me that I should get taken care of too. Okay? Heard some powerful stuff. That's the kind of stuff when you're really busy and tired and frustrated with life, keeps you going. Okay. We found that these study variables trended, went in the directions we've said, and it affirmed our basic idea that relationships, creativity, introspection, contemplation, and spirituality combined seem to get the job done. There were limitations. Every research study has limitations. The small sample and the fact that people volunteered to be in the study. Now, we did randomly assign them to the intervention or the control group. That's a big thing. But they volunteered to be in the study. So I like to say we learned a lot about people who volunteered to be in studies, and we didn't learn anything about people who don't volunteer to be in studies. Okay? And that's a limitation that just as we're looking at this, we have to keep in mind. The big limitation was that both of these groups were in the same senior center and both met the same time on Wednesday afternoons. Now, I'm not really expecting to do a lot. I'm more checking out the ideas than worrying about. But the reality is, the intervention group got the idea that, hey guys, we're the important people. We're getting to do this cool thing. And the movie matinee people figured out they were not the group. And definitely that had effects on our findings. Now that's not unusual. You always have limitations, and you just have to really keep them in mind when you're trying to say, well, what did we learn? Okay, next slide. So I did another study. Now the first study was funded by Sigma Theta Tau, which is nursing's international nursing honor society, and the second one was funded by the American Nursing Foundation, and to get funded twice was really nice because I was up for tenure. What wasn't so nice is I got funded basically at the same time for both of them. So weeks after beginning the first study, I started working on putting together and doing the second study. So it was kind of like learn from today and put it to use in the, a few weeks later with the second study. But with the second study, we had a little bit more time, a little bit more funding, and we were able to do this in 2 separate senior centers. Okay? So they didn't know each other. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't comparing with each other. And instead of a movie matinee for our control group, we did what's called a delayed intervention group. So what that means is we did our intervention the first time, and those other 10 ladies were our control group. But then, after we did all the measurements, we did the intervention all over again in the control group. So I ended up with still being able to compare the 2 groups, but 20 people got the intervention. And for me, the most important thing is we're still learning things about the program and how to do this and what to put in. And we were able to put what we learned from the first group into effect right away, the second group, and not wait for 1.5 years or 2 years to get funding and do another study. That turned out really well. Next slide. What did we learn from it? Well, okay, first of all, this again was a randomized control trial. For anybody who's interested in the research, I put some stuff in here just so you'd know. Again, same group, women age 60 and older. And here are the specific aims. What was I trying to accomplish this time? Well, this time I was more wanting to see how the PATH program works than I was trying to figure out what the PATH program was supposed to be. I had something to start with. So we're starting to test, how does this work? How can we put this together? And we were able to start getting some idea of what the effects of the PATH program are on self-transcendence and the other variables. Now again, we still have a teeny tiny little sample, so you're not looking for statistical significance. Okay? Next slide. So what did we get? Well, we got some statistical significance again. We got significant results for 3 variables: self-transcendence, life satisfaction, I think, if I remember, and health-related quality of life again. But we didn't get a statistical difference before and after the intervention for the first group. And we didn't see a statistically significant difference between the first group and the second group when we measured before the second group when they were just the control. What we saw were differences before and after for the second group. Remember, we learned stuff from the first group and put it to work right away in the second group? So my conclusion is I'm suspecting we probably are pretty close to having a good program. And for a pilot study, that's pretty much all you're looking to find out. The fact that some of these variables were, and particularly that self-transcendence was statistically significant with such a small number of people, kind of gives us a hint that maybe it's a pretty important factor, a pretty big deal. All right, next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, can you go back? I didn't tell you about the qualitative results, what the women in the study told us. And what they said was they had a new perspective on life and death, on themselves, and again, and we heard much more about looking at themselves as people and not only as caregivers. There was a lot of talk about caregiving and a lot of talk about seeing themselves as worthy of care also, not instead of being nice and caring for other people, but also. And that's the biggest thing. Okay, so conclusions. I have to. Okay. Basically, we feel like the theory that those 5 dimensions of transcendence that gave us the foundation for this plan fit pretty good. And we feel like that mindfulness and the group processes and the creative processes and the at-home practice are working pretty good. So it confirmed some of that for us. What we also started to suspect was that not only could this program be useful for all kinds of older adults, people in the community, people at senior centers, but it might have some particular usefulness in 2 very important populations that there's a lot of attention to nationally. One of those are people who need to self-manage chronic diseases, how to take care of your arthritis, your high blood pressure, your diabetes, and learn what you need to learn and do what you need to do to stay healthier. And we also see some potential usefulness in caregivers, and I'm thinking potentially Alzheimer's caregivers. So these were ideas we got. These aren't things we proved now, understand. They're ideas we got. Okay? All right. So implications, where next? Remember I keep saying with just a small number of people in the study, a small sample size, you don't expect to get statistical significance, and you need statistical significance in a randomized, controlled, experimental study to be able to say self-transcendence was increased by this program. And when that increased, these other things increased too. So what I'm in the process of doing now is looking for funding for a bigger sample, probably 150 to 200 people, and do this group of 10 over and over and over for control. When one group has it, another group at a different location has something else. I'm really looking at doing that in residential housing for older adults, something like Christian Care Community or Baptist Towers or organizations like that where there's a lot of older people kind of handy. It's where I did my first 3 studies because senior centers tend to have smaller numbers of people. Okay? So we need to do a big study. If we do that and if we get really strong results, then what I want to do with this is package it up. I'm one person and I'm 66 years old. So I can't run around doing this for everybody who might benefit. And I also know that some people have more advantages than others, and some people have more chance of participating in something like this program, and other people have very little opportunity in money and time and ability to care for themselves. So what I want to do is package this up. It's called manualize it. Put it all together in a big book with training for the person who's leading it. And that program, I would like to find some big company, some big aging company to buy it. I have to prove it first, right? With the big statistical significance thing. And if we do that, instead of, usually if you sell something like that to a big company, you get what's called royalties. You get a little bit of money coming in. That would go to paying for a specified number of small groups in low-income and minority communities to have access to this, not just people who are better off. So that's where we hope to go with it. The next step, I'm starting a study right now. I did get a small amount of funding. I'm starting a very little study doing this with a group of 10 Alzheimer's caregivers. I haven't even gone through IRB yet, so we haven't started recruiting. But we're going to do that. And I'm working on getting a bigger funding so I can do that. Yep.